My name is Jeannie Shea, and this is my 9/11 story. So I was traveling on business back then and had flown into New York City the night before. And I'll never forget, as the plane was descending, thinking that you could literally reach out and touch the Twin Towers. It was quite a magnificent sight. So the next day I got up, I had a number of appointments calling on doctors in the city and out on Long Island. So I'm driving out to Long Island to my first appointments, and I was lost, as I always was back then. Remember 20 years ago, we didn't have GPSs. So I have my paper map, I'm paying attention, and I have my back to everything going on in the city as I'm driving. Radio's off, I'm really concentrating, trying to find where I'm going. I get to my first appointment, walk in, go in and speak to the administrator, ask him how his day is, and he said, well, fine, considering. And I said, oh, what's going on? Well, he proceeds to take me over to a television and shows me what's going on, and by then the first tower had been hit. I go back into the business office with the ladies that I'm going to be doing some work with, and they all tell me, you need to get out of here quickly because you won't be able to get back to your hotel because all the bridges and tunnels will close down and you're going to be stranded. At that point, we didn't know what had happened. We really didn't have any clue. I mean, the first plane had just hit. So I stuck around for a little while, and then the second plane hit. And I'll never forget all of these women making phone calls, trying to find their husbands, their children, reaching out to everyone and anyone, trying to make sure their loved ones were safe. And at that point, it felt like New York City was under attack because that's all we knew, that there had been the two incidences with the Twin Towers. And my overwhelming feeling was my poor children, who were preteens at the time, know that I'm in New York City. My husband knows that I'm in New York City, and I didn't want them worried about me. So of course I'm trying to call them, and I can't get them on the phone because all the phone lines are just slammed. Eventually my husband got a hold of me. It felt like forever to me, but he tells me it was a very short period of time. And so he knew I was safe. He knew that I was not in the city, that those appointments were later in the day, but I was actually out on Long Island. Soon after, I left that doctor's office and started my trek back to my hotel. And when I got there, and it was on Long Island, so all the bridges did shut down, the tunnels did shut down, everything came to a screeching halt, but I was able to get back to my hotel. And by now, all the planes had been grounded and people were pouring off these planes and just being dumped at hotels. And they had no luggage, they had no room reservations or anything. And I remember sitting there and just watching people walk in, just stunned. And I struck up a conversation with a young girl, and she was in the same boat as all of us, but she had no luggage, she had nothing. And she sat down with me, I shared my sandwich with her. I made sure she had a hotel room because I didn't want her to be stranded. And then I asked her what she needed, and she said, I have no clothes, I have nothing. And I told her, I said, well, I have a car. So as soon as things kind of calm down, I'm happy to take you, we'll go to Walmart, we'll go somewhere, we'll get you some necessities. So that was kind of our plan. In the meantime, my boss, who is from California, was in town, and he and I were supposed to be working together. He was on the mainland. He was across Long Island in his hotel, and he did not have a car. And so he and I were communicating and trying to figure out a plan. How are we going to get out of New York City? How are we, when are the airports going to open? We're probably stranded here for a while. So he said, as soon as the bridges open and the tunnels open, why don't you come pick me up at my hotel? And we'll just drive to Baltimore. He said, my son's there, we can stay, with his family, hang out at his house, let's just head that way. I don't remember how long it was before the tunnels opened, but I do remember it took a really long time to get through the tunnels, back over to New York City because there were police officers, there were dogs, and every single car had to be searched. So I don't know how long it took, but I went and picked up Roger, finally got to him. We drove to Baltimore, and as we're driving away from the city, off in the distance, you can just see the billowing smoke coming up, and it was unbelievable. And of course, the towers were gone. He and I didn't even speak. There was nothing to talk about. It was just this silent drive. And then we ended up going to a hotel in Baltimore. And while we were in that hotel, all of these pilots and airline crew were being dumped off at these hotels, and nobody had vehicles. So we were all kind of gathering in the lobby, and we started strategizing. How do we get home? What do we do? Nobody knew how long airports were going to be closed. So we had worked out a plan. I was the only person who had a car. I actually had a van. And so we had mapped out, we'd gone around the room and we were all talking about, now, where are you from? So you're Texas, you're Arizona, you're Kentucky. And we had mapped out how we were going to get home. So the plan was we were going to take my rental car and we were just going to start driving and drop people off all along the way. And the last person, the furthest away, would turn in the rental car. That was going to be our plan. Well, in the meantime, come to find out, a really good friend of mine's husband was at the Pentagon, and he was stranded at the Pentagon. He was able to reach out to me and he said, hey, if I can catch a ride to you, if I can get to you in Baltimore, are you willing for us to drive home to Birmingham? And I said, sure. So Wesley made it to Baltimore. We ran back to my hotel, got my stuff, and we took off to Birmingham, and we drove overnight. I remember we stopped for a couple of hours in a rest area. So 9/11 happened on a Tuesday. We got home, I walked in my door Friday at noon. My husband had been at work, but he came home to see me and to check on me. And David walked in the door, he gave me a hug, and I dissolved. And I cried for 3 days. And I just couldn't quit crying. So all of that time, you know, you kind of get in that operations mode. Put one foot in front of the other. You're thinking, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And it was like once David was there, I was safe and I could finally relax. But I remember my knees buckling and just falling to the ground and crying. And then I could not talk about 9/11. For goodness, it was at least 5 years without just trembling and shaking and crying. And going through that experience has really given me a different perspective on trauma that people may go through, because through that whole thing, I was safe. My life was never in danger. I was never in the midst of the true chaos. And so what I experienced was so minor compared to what all the people who were right there experienced. And yet I know how it's impacted me. I know the emotional impact it's had on me. And I can't even imagine what all of those people have gone through. So going through that experience has helped, it's changed my perspective on life. You know, life is very short. We're not promised tomorrow. So I try to remind myself every day, live life to the fullest, reach out to other people, be kind, and just be grateful for what we have and for how blessed we all are.